Hi everyone. So today I'm going to evaluate the effectiveness of New Haven's bicycle system and the plans of the local government to make the city more cycle-friendly. Now I should start off by saying that there is enormous potential for the use of bicycles in New Haven, as the city is relatively flat, is small enough to be quickly traversed by bicycle, and has a fairly dense urban core that lends itself to pedestrian and cyclist travel. To drive this point home, a study from the 2000 census showed that New Haven has one of the highest proportions of people commuting to work by non-motorized means in the Northeast. It even trumps Boston, which has promoted itself as America's walking city. Add these facts to the growing concern about carbon emissions and the newly discovered health benefits of cycling, such as less risk of being overweight, and it's not surprising that the local government has caught on to this. In fact, the local government seems to have begun what appears to be a very large effort to make the city cycle-friendly in the face of its automobile traffic. For example, the city government worked to ensure that New Haven's newest high-rise development will contain a bicycle shop and plenty of bicycle facilities, which can be a big deal in a small city like New Haven. Also, just this summer, the city put in a pair of bike tracks along its Orange Street, connecting its urban core to its East Rock Park. As you can see in this map of the city's current on-street bike facilities, these tracks are some of the longest on-street bike routes that the city has and are one of the boldest bicycle moves so far. Also, these tracks definitely get a lot of use and have undoubtedly paid for themselves. Now, to give you an idea of how much this pay is, we'll just take the distance of the bike route according to Google Earth and some cost estimates from a recent study of bicycle potential in New Haven's urban core, and we get about $27,000. Including striping, symbols on the street, and signs. Well, that's certainly worth a rise in property taxes along 10 large city blocks at least. Of course, while this was a bold bicycle move, it seems that this is only the beginning of a full-fledged cycle crusade. In fact, if you look just out the window of this room that I'm sitting in, you will see the construction on the next line of defense that the city is building to shield cyclists from cars. The Farmington Canal Greenway. Now, the Farmington Canal was originally constructed in 1828 to ship goods along the entire 84-mile length of Connecticut. However, after its first 15 years, it was filled in and boasted a railroad for over a century and a half. In the 80s, the railroads finally moved out, and the line has since been abandoned, filled in further, but thankfully for the most part, converted to bike trails. Now, the U.S. federal government has been handing out subsidies to convert the abandoned line into a gigantic bike trail that spans the whole state of Connecticut. And Mayor DeStefano of New Haven has managed to secure a whopping $6 million in federal funding for the improvement of the line in New Haven. So far, he's been using it mostly to repair the automobile bridges that run over the canal, such as the one that you see out the window there. He's also used some to pave and mark the portion of the trail connecting the urban core to the rest of the greenway that runs several miles to the north along the old rail line. The current plan is to connect the Farmington Canal to a jogging cycle path known as the Vision Trail that runs to New Haven's harbor and connects to a shoreline greenway. As of now, the Vision Trail does get use, but is in need of significant maintenance and is far from filling its potential. The $6 million in funding has been nearly used up, and most of the discussion now is about how to connect the canal to the Vision Trail as well as the aforementioned Orange Street bike tracks. Now, a huge question that has been circulating in New Haven's cycle community is whether this greenway is an effective way to make a cycle-friendly city with the money that was given. To tackle this question, we'll have to consider the cost of on-street bike facilities, which are presently absent around the greenway and are few and far between in the city itself. So let's say that instead of the Canal Greenway, we put in a pair of cycle tracks along Dixwell Avenue and Elm Street, a route which runs parallel to the canal and, for the most part, has automobile lanes that could be shrunken or removed to accommodate cycle travel. If we take into account the street distance from the Vision Trail to the New Haven border, the number of intersections along the route, and the same cost estimates used before, we get a project cost of about $230,000. This includes all that is necessary to set up a safe and functioning bicycle route, including striping, symbols on the street, road signs at intersections, cycle traffic lights, and bollards to protect cyclists. Now, this is only 3.8% of the $6 million cost for the Farmington Canal Greenway. In some ways is much safer than the Greenway since the at-grade crossings with the automobile streets have traffic lights on them. Furthermore, enriching the street with cycle facilities has the ability to spark commercial and residential development along it in a way that enriching a park doesn't necessarily. So you can begin to see that the Greenway doesn't necessarily abide by your standard economic logic. Another example is a recent study commissioned by the New Haven government to evaluate the potential use of bicycle infrastructure in New Haven's urban core of 36 city blocks, also known as the 9 Square. According to the study, the entire 9 Square area can be made safe for cyclists with about $1.5 million, just a quarter of the canal budget. Also, if you were to take out the study's proposal to change 2 streets in the 9 Square from one-way to two-way, the project cost would only be $364,000, just 6% of the Farmington Canal Greenway budget. So, is the Farmington Canal the best way to take $6 million and make a cycle-friendly city? Well, not really, considering the other options on the table. But of course, the Canal Greenway has some advantages that on-street bike facilities do not have. As a recreational green space, it is a more relaxed and restorative atmosphere than an on-street bike route, with minimal noise and plenty of fresh air. It's clearly more suited to jogging and recreational cycling, making its value difficult to gauge in purely economic terms. But this brings up yet another question. Is a recreational greenway something that addresses the needs of the community surrounding the canal line? Well, it's true that the community around the line does use it for recreational purposes. However, it seems the more common reason for cycling, especially given the economic situation of the area, seems to be as a cost-effective means of everyday transit. People cycle to run errands, to commute to work, and to get to school more than they cycle for pure enjoyment. And to harken back to a graph shown earlier, New Haven has a higher number of people commuting to work by non-motorized means than other cities in the Northeast, not necessarily a higher number of recreational cyclists. So it seems the best way to help cyclists in the area is not really with an 84-mile recreational parkway for bicycles, but with street facilities that give access to schools, stores, and workplaces. Also, these citizens don't really seem to need money going into park features such as the 38-stone pillars lining the canal or the fancy bridges that run over it, as much as they need money going into safer, more cyclable streets. In fact, if you look at the current use of the fancy bridges, they seem to be more helpful as unofficial homeless shelters than as aesthetic park features. This has also triggered a growing concern about the police watch that will be necessary to ensure the underpasses are used appropriately when the whole route opens up. So the canal doesn't really make too much economic sense or even social sense given the needs of the community around it. However, it does seem to redeem itself in the political sense it makes, at least. For example, big flashy projects like this undoubtedly have more political selling power than on-street bike improvements. And heck, while I sit here debating the best way to spend $6 million, the money wouldn't even be here if this project wasn't large enough to attract the attention of the federal government. So perhaps in some ways it speaks to a flaw in our political system, and maybe sometimes an entity like the federal government has too much power for something that can't comprehend the needs of specific communities. Of course, the project makes sense on other political levels, so it perhaps points out flaws in politics in general. For example, it makes sense in terms of the legality of zoning, because long stretches of public park through private city fabric are often very difficult to establish or recover. So turning over the canal to private development would probably be a loss of opportunity lamented by future generations, especially if these generations don't have the priority that we have of making cycle-friendly streets. Also, big flashy projects like this raise awareness about cycling in New Haven. And if the city is in fact kicking off a cycle crusade, then what better way to do it with something that gets citizens to say, maybe I should buy a bicycle. So, while the Canal Greenway does make sense on some level, I think it's clear where we need to go. We need to make the streets safe, and we need to create street bicycle infrastructure that connects to the Farmington Canal Greenway if we want to get our full $6 million worth out of this project.